Yeah. How you be? Here was the mix of the blue sea. It's me. Y'all know what time it is, man. Chapter 10, 18. Oh, I, I've been repeating myself for like a month and a half, right? I get on, I come chop it up with y'all, and it's the same thing. Things keep getting crazier and crazier with some of the information that we get, even during a fight of all things. Because I'm gonna get to that last. For obvious reasons, there's a lot to unpack there, and I may have to do some extra content in regards to some of the information from the end of the chapter. So just wanted to get that out the way. Let's get right into it, man. Cover page time. Ulti and Pepe. It's kind of funny, right? Because remember a few chapters ago when I was talking about we might not that when Big Mom first hit her with the Conqueror's punch, I was like, oh, she's a rap. Remember, I said we might not see her again to a cover story. She was gonna be out the arc. That's how hard Big Mom hit her. But obviously that wasn't the case. She popped up again, but it was just funny. And then now we see a few chapters later, the ulti's in the cover page. That's crazy. But so we're back on the live floor. Okay, Tama gave her orders for the Smile Free users, and the scrubs are all fighting each other, right? And the numbers before was like a 3-to-1 ratio. Now we find out the actual number um, of, of gifters, right? Who switch sides. There was 300 headliners, but overall now we're at this, it's 16,000 to 9,000, which is a little less than 2-to-1. So we're doing really good. And the more scrubs that we get out the way, the better, because they are annoying. Remember, like even what Whitebeard said, right? Why he didn't want to face the Marines, like not because he's afraid of them. It's just sometimes it's just an inconvenience. It's a waste of time and resource. Sometimes it's better to just dip, that kind of thing. So getting these scrubs out the way it is important. They might not be strong, but they are a nuisance at best, as we've seen throughout the arc. Their numbers are just annoying. So now some of these guys are putting two and two together. All right, time to go after Tama. And like I said before, we got Auntie Nami and Uncle Usopp gonna have to escort her to somewhere safe. I still think it's gonna be to try to reach more Smile users, but we'll see. It just really depends on how far they get right on the with the help. So they're running, and some of these scrubs basically are pretty close to, I won't say capturing, Usopp, Nami, and Tama, but who knows, right? And Usopp and Nami are already tired because they've been fighting, Especially, and Usopp has been taking some serious damage, so they're not exactly in 100% to just be dealing with all of this. And then out of nowhere, man, Daifugu, Daifugu just pops up like, "Hey, Scorpion Death Needle. Finish him. Daifugo wins. Fatalities." That's pretty much what happened. And then we run into Speedo, and they have a little chat. And I don't know if that character had been named before to the right of when Speed is first shown in the panel, the one that's basically explaining that the commander was fine. He's just a little knocked out. He's had a rough day too himself, from just as soon as they ran into Luffy and Zoro, right? From back in fighting Hawkins. Like, this dude is tired. He definitely deserves a vacation too. But Speedo was gonna take them somewhere, and this is where things get interesting. Not that that wasn't, but we so basically Cipher Pole, right? And I had brought this up last week about the derby hat Cipher Pole guy. I actually forgot about the other two because they don't, these guys don't have names, right? We have the guy with the Udahara Kisuke lookingish hat, and then we got the Dr. Seuss looking one with the with the mask that he carries with him. That we got, I want to say like 10 chapters ago. Actually, I think he's the same one that was with the Derby Hat guy when Orochi shot one of them, right? But anyway, these are the same guys that we've seen this arc. And something I was wondering about is did they know about who's who already? And my other issue or my other concern with them being there is it Robin related, right? Because they know the Straw Hat Pirates are there. And I think we're being thrown off of what he says. Because they talk about the numbers thing, right? What I was saying earlier, the 16,000 versus 9,000. I think Cypher Polar are very opportunistic. Now we've seen what happened. We didn't see what happened, but they also showed up after whatever happened at Baltigo, right? So they do seem very opportunistic, the same way Stussy and Whole Cake, right? Took advantage of, you know, took Dufeld out the game for whatever reason, right? But Stussy had other reasons for being at Whole Cake Island, not just for the wedding. So this is a common thing that we've talked about before with Cypherpole and some of their agendas. They state that whoever wins this battle is of no consequence to them. I'm not sure if I believe that, right? Because if Kaido wins, it's a problem. It's more of a problem for them than it would be just for the alliance to be successful. The alliance being successful, it actually probably helps them, depending on what they think about the current power system. And I mean by the Gorosei, because they already have this plan of an implied extermination, right, through probably flood means, as a lot of people have speculated about that, or maybe the ancient weapons, that kind of thing. Because I still think personally, the Gorosei have. There's no way they don't know the information of the poneglyphs and which ones are important. Uh, Other than maybe Dragon or Shanks, I don't see anybody, too many singular people or entities besides the Gorosei and Instant Messenger Sama that have more information than anyone else. The closest was probably the Oharans, and we've seen what happened to them. But for him to make this statement makes it look like, okay, regardless of what happens in this war, the Cypher Pole or the war government will not be involved. That's what they want you to think. You know, I'm I'm just not buying it because just me personally, the opportunity to had a chance to abduct Robin, I don't know how that's not more important than eliminating who's who or confirming his death, because that's what they talk about, right? Well, who's who, any information he may have in the past is outdated. But how true could that possibly be? You know, remember, characters lie on panel all the time. Not all the time, but it does happen. Something a character says on panel, that's not to another person. It's basically exposition to us, the reader, ends up being a lie or a half truth or something of that nature. So I don't know how much I'm buying in. I just don't trust Cypherpole. You shouldn't. Like, that's their job to not be trusted, right? So I'm not buying that if the correct opportunity pops up, like to the Yonko maybe are off limits because we see they do have some sort of connection with the world government to begin with, which has been an issue for however long the actual Yonko system has existed. It's probably been an underlying issue that we just, the reader, aren't aware of because that's not really talked about pre-time skip like that, right? That's not where the focus of the series was. It's just something underlying that we know at some point would have to be addressed. So the information who's has, I'm wondering is what we'll talk about later, what he brings up at the end of the chapter. But if that's not the only reason, then is there something else? Like, is it information related to the Gomu Gomu itself, right? That could be something that people don't want it to be known, or the world government doesn't want to be known, which I'm still iffy on that because I'm just not there yet with the Gomu Gomu being some special fruit in comparison to the any other fruit. I just, like I said last week, unless there's something that you specifically have to turn to rubber, I just don't see, other than a couple of other devil fruit powers, it doesn't really give you any type of advantage, that another fruit wouldn't. like Fujitora's fruit. It's way more advantage than the Gomu Gomu. There's so much stuff you could do with that, including, um, I'm assuming if Enel was able to leave the planet, and this still hasn't been explained why people can breathe in space, because for whatever reason, maybe it's because I really don't know why he can breathe in space, but he can. So it could be something that it's off planet. That's so shaky. But that's another story. The information that he has seems related to what he brings up at the end of the chapter. Like I said, I'll get more into it, but it's the sun god thing. I do want to bring this up. It's just a random coincidence for me personally that this happened because a couple of chapters ago, when I just I rewatch old episodes of One Piece all the time, even if it's not content related. It's something I do. But my algorithm had actually showed me a video about the sun god, and you probably may have seen it before. I'll have to look for it because I put it in a playlist like a week and a half ago, and I just watched the first 4 or 5 minutes to see is this an actual like video of content or somebody trying to sell me something, that kind of thing. But it was actually sounded pretty cool, but it had to do with the mythology of the sun god. It's like some 15 or 16 minute video. I forget the name of the person. When I get on YouTube later to upload this and all that, I'll probably just add a link in my comments or something for the video about the sun god. But I just thought that was just crazy coincidence that this happened this chapter. Um, so Cypherpole goes to explain that they might not have to do any kind of interference because since he's fighting Jimbe, which that's already a rough one. They basically just say he might not make it to the morning anyway. Let's just make sure he's dead and let's get on up out of here. And the confirmation of his identity. So that to me says they probably personally have never met Who's Who before, because when this went down, who knows what their status was, right? If they were even in, Cipher Pole to begin with. I'm pretty sure they were, because most of the Cipher Pole, they start them off as children, right? Like, even we seen back in the Harn incident, Span's father was I think his name was, I want to say Spandex, Spandine. He was a Cipher Pole agent. So I don't think, Who's Who should be somebody that they don't know what he would look like, right? And especially if he's always had the fruit. Well, not always, but he's had this fruit for quite some time, right? So even in a different form, like a hybrid, they still should know that, like saber tooth tiger fruit or whatever it's called, right? Because I'm not sure if it's been named yet. But yeah, that's just a crazy situation with Cypherpole. How much information they have, their agendas, their dealings with the Orochi through, for the world government, of course, and the fact that they're Wano special, and then you hear that's what's stated by Kaido, right? Which he has to have ties to the government too, in some way, shape, or form, either past and present, right? So because of the Shanks thing, it does make Kaido's, I don't know, it makes things iffy for me personally, that whole ordeal to begin with, because Who's Who ends up with Kaido. So it's like, did Who's Who know? Does he know about this? Like, does he know Who's Who is who he is? And this is on purpose, like I said before, because I didn't know who his allegiance actually is to, or does he have a different agenda? But based on what Cypherpole is saying now, clearly Who's Who is not in Cypherpole anymore. And then the fact that letting somebody who went rogue just disappear would set a bad precedent, but Robert Lucci left. He came back, but he left. So maybe that wasn't, I was like, I don't know, because when the cover story, it's like you don't know what information was covered up. So the rest of the world may not be aware of the fact that a Cypherpole agent turned rogue and then went back to Cypherpole, right? And then remember, Lucci had swore vengeance against the world government. So it really could be a situation where he still has his own plans and he just said, forget it, I'll just go back. As far as they know, I'm just as obedient as I always have. And even if they suspect something, maybe Rob Lucci has some sort of plan. And, like I said, if it involves Who's Who, it really wouldn't be that much of a shock. Now, if that matters now, who knows, right? But that's just pretty much my thought process with that when it comes to who's whole character and his backstory. Because last week I brought up, I'm like, well, does he really have a grudge against Luffy, or is it Shanks? Like, what if it mattered who got the Gomu Gomer? He'd still be upset because of what he endured, but he just didn't seem like he really had a grudge against Luffy, right? And in the beginning of the fight, well, not the beginning of the fight, but the beginning of the fighting in this chapter with Who's Who in Jimbe, he basically says, my grudge is really with Shanks, but I guess you could say to a lesser extent now it's Luffy too. So just him saying that to Jinbei pretty much told Jinbei, you're not gonna leave here, homie, because that means at some point you might try to go after the future Pirate King, man, the Gomu Gomu man himself, the Phenom from Fusha. You already know what it is, what time it is, man. That's the captain, Luffy Central. That whole situation, and Jinbei's too loyal, and he's been with Luffy off and on for a long time, at least even in spirit when he's not around, right? Because Jinbei's just one of those characters that's boss Jimboski, man. Like I said, he's that vet that you got to have, even if he's not. Well, he's a starter on the Straw Hats, but that archetype, like Brook is off the bench, right? He's the sixth man, whatever you want to call him. As far as being a older character with experience, and he might be immature, but he does know stuff, even though we never really get information from Brook like you would expect we would. But I guess that's just to make the story still interesting and not Brook just know everything, right? That would be kind of boring. But with Jim Boski, it hit different, right? Because he was the only one that truly knows how painful it was for Luffy, right? And he almost died to Akainu too, right? Like Akainu almost killed all three of them in the same day. Like that would have been a feat for the series, right? Like from you got Whitebeard, Jinbei, Ace, and Akainu Ace and Luffy all in the same day. Like Akainu would have been the goat for that one. But regardless of the circumstances, right? Obviously, Whitebeard wasn't full strength. That's another argument that is avoidable for this chapter. But just the concept of it, right? How strong Jinbei really is and what he survived and that kind of thing. I've always liked Jinbei. I thought he was cool. He don't say, sometimes it seems like he doesn't say things on purpose, and he'll just like stay quiet type of situation. But I don't know. He's good to have around. And he still lets them learn. He doesn't seem like the type that's just like, I'm just gonna help you walk through everything. He knows that they have to do their thing. The Straw Hats, like they have to show up, they have to experience things for themselves, and they have to figure things out for themselves. He's just like he's the helmsman for the ship. He's the natural helmsman for the crew as well. So to me, he's just perfect to have, and he's strong enough to where he's not overpowered, but he's strong enough where he can get stuff done, and it doesn't look like OP. Because even back in Whole Cake, Jimmy's not beating Big Mom 1-on-1, but he can probably tangle with her, especially now, because everybody's hockey blooms, right? Well, Jimbe almost died, so by that default and his resolve, he should technically be stronger, just like the rest of the crew has got stronger since those events, right? Same for Akainu and the Aokiji. I've brought that up before. And speaking of which, right, before I get real in deep with the actual fight with Who's Who, because there's some detail there that I really appreciated for the fight, not just it occurring, but some of the hand to hand stuff. But the Cipher Pole guy, I think the one with the Udahara mask, he mentions that the thing about having information, right? Not just the betrayal part, but having information, right? We don't see too many characters leave the government that we're told of, and they just have information that they're allowed to have. Like Dofi wasn't a part of the Marines in a sense. He was a Tenryubito, so his access to information is a lot more deadly compared to everyone else's, right? And even though it's not confirmed that who's an Impo down, I just can't imagine where else would they keep him, or else why wouldn't they just kill him? You know what I mean? I still don't understand why some of these guys I guess that's just not a thing in One Piece where certain criminals, depending on what they did, we don't kill them because the stuff they do in One Piece is technically like that's just war crimes level of like some of the stuff that they do. Like it's really crazy, but for him to have that kind of information, I just bringing this up because one of my points with Aokiji and this whole thing with Sword and why it kind of might be a part of it. I brought this up was why would he let Akiji walk away from the Marines like after a fight when the way they made it sound at least that he had a chance to take his life and he didn't, but he didn't have no problem quote unquote getting ready to kill Kobe, a kid in front of everybody. So that kind of doesn't make sense to me when Aokiji goes straight to the Blackbeard Pirates right after that. So like I've explained it there as just one of the key points about why I kind of because there's like 4 or 5 legitimate things, at least in my opinion, I bring up in that video. But one of them has to do with Cypherpole and what they're talking about now, and that's having access to information and just roaming out in the world, being free with it. We know that the Gorosei do not like that. They Buster called O'Hara over information. So the control flow of information is important to them just as much as any weapon, right? Information is a weapon. And then to add on to that, there's information about actual ultimate weapons. So, just something to think about as far as Akainu and Aokiji in this whole situation, because for all intents and purposes, Aokiji should have never been able to leave alive from that place. He was an admiral of all people. Like, even Garp knew, I won't say he's afraid of the Marines, right? He's a Marine true and true. But at the same time, he never retired. And then part of it might just be so he can keep an eye on stuff. But the other part is because he knows it would be a headache. He knows way too much to just be free in the world and not have to deal with the world government, right? They would probably have to exercise a lot of resources similar to with Rayleigh, where they're like, it's just not worth it. Screw it. What can he really tell anybody? But that's so flip floppy because at the same time, it's like, these people have information that they don't want the rest of the world to know about. You just got to hope they don't tell people because maybe it's based on if it's things that are time related, they can't do anything about anyway, similar to the Wano situation where even if a lot of information was given, like with Roger and Odin and Laugh Tale, which I'll get into that obviously towards the end of the video, that just because you have information doesn't mean you can do anything about it. And Rayleigh brought up that similar point, when they were speaking when he's speaking to Robin about the Poneglyphs, and he said, don't don't rush to get to where you're going because it may not matter in a sense. You rushing to get there, just stay on the path that you're on. That's a mistake that we made, and of course there were circumstances for that because Roger was going to die anyway, so they didn't really have a choice to rush. So that's, I think, part of the reason why that's so funny with Laugh Tale. That's part of the because we never really get to find out exactly what they're laughing about. But one of the reasons why they're laughing and crying though is probably has to do with the fact that they finally got there, only to find out you got here right place, wrong time. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Now let's get into Who's Who versus Jambowski. We had a really good fight here going on. Can't wait for the anime for this because y'all know how I feel about Rokushiki, man. It's like a nin version of taijutsu, but for One Piece, so it's not so complicated, right? But that's kind of how I think about it. If taijutsu was applied through nin, you would get Rokushiki. I still I thought we would see if Who had a version of the Roku Ogon because in the beginning of the fight, Jimbe first notices last chapter. He's like when he's seen Pistol Fang, he's like, "Hey man, this is some hardcore advanced level stuff you're doing here. Like this is like not even your average Cypher Poe agent is not doing what Who's doing." And was he this nasty back in the day? Because it's like if he was this level back in the day, just think that's basically saying that how strong Shanks was even back in the day, right? Like before Luffy even had a fruit, this dude was already nasty, like just straight. I don't even know how he fights. None of us do. Like, he can fight with a sword, but we don't know anything else about him, as far as like how Shanks gets down. But whatever he does, it must just absolutely filthy. That's why everybody just leaves him alone. It's not hype. It can't be. Nobody's tested Shanks except for Blackbeard. And that was probably some circumstance because like Blackbeard doesn't even talk about that. Shanks is the one who talks about that. So that's how serious it must have been for him because he might not be arrogant, but he has to know how strong he is, in relation to the rest of the world, especially being around Roger, and Rayleigh and Scopper Caban and Odin. So he knows what real strength is. Like he knows, you know what I'm saying? Like he knew characters that are, in their prime are stronger than the current strong characters now. So as far as strength is concerned, I have to take Shank's word as face value because to me, he's experienced the most more than other characters, and to a certain extent, Blackbeard too, right? But to me, that makes sense. Like, oh yeah, he would know. He would definitely know. So, who goes in? Jimbe goes in, right, in this fight because we see Tech Eye and we see the moving Tech Eye, which from what I remember, I think only Jobber was able to supposedly move while using Tech Eye. But we see Shave, we see Moonwalk in the beginning of the chapter. That's basically his version of Skywalk. He just says Moonwalk. Shout out to the I don't know if he was the creator of it, but he sure was the master of the moonwalk. So I like these techniques being brought up because to me, like I said, Sanji, Sabo, Kobe, these are people I think towards the end of the series, like all these characters, and maybe even a Kainu, you know what I mean? Like people like that we don't really get to see fight that. Like that would be crazy if Fujitora was out here like we didn't see him use those abilities, but that would just be crazy for an admiral to use them too. Like they just seem more devil fruit based and they have access to hockey. But other than that, we don't see no crazy. We don't see any crazy six powers. But we do see that he also applies army hockey to his fangs during one of these classes. That Calvary Fang Flash thing that he does, and Jinbei kind of like he's all his moves are based on martial arts. Like he says fisherman karate all the time, but we see the jujitsu situation. But I like what he did when he was blocking. He had one arm under the other, and then you could actually see like the detail they put into it. That would have put into it, and a couple of panels later, he basically like kind of flipped the way his arms were. I won't say flipped, but he just rotated his arms in a way to grab who's fangs. I thought that was kind of cold, like the amount of detail that it's kind of simple, like when you explain it, but that would be something most of the time in a panel they wouldn't get that much detail. They would just show him like grabbing the teeth and just slamming them or something like that. But I thought that was cool that he did that. And then we seen that pistol fang, even if you have armor in hockey, can cut into you. But the other thing I think that this is showing, and I might get into this with Jinbei specifically, the levels of armament, right? Because he was able to cut him with pistol fang, but yet later it didn't matter. His arm in hockey, like he changed the density of it. He had more strength to his arm in hockey throughout the fight, and that's what they're showing you, especially at the end, right? And I'm not sure or not. I don't want to assume, but I feel like his ultimate technique had conquerors applied to it. I don't want to just jump the gun on that because we've seen lightning be used before and it not be necessarily conquerors, at least in the anime. So I'm not really sure what's going on with that. But if it's gargoyle, tile, fist, or whatever he called it, it looked like because it was cold, right? You seen who's who get into that stance, and he's basically doing something similar to what Rob Lucci did to Luffy when he would snap his fingers, and he was basically snapping his fingers to do Shigon in a sense, and it was tearing Luffy up. It was cutting into the rubber. He was tearing him up. Who's trying to do something similar to that, but it's just like finger, some kind of I don't know what technique that'd be called, but when you take your fingers and you jab them into people, something like that, and we actually see one of whose fingers snap on Jimbe's armament because Jimbe is stanced up. He's sitting there so long. I'm like, man, this reminds me of Naruto using, sage, sage powers, like the natural energy thing where you can't move. That's what that's what it reminded me of. And the stuff that Who's Who was saying, I thought was like, I thought he was trying to psychologically dictate this fight. But he had some legitimate questions because he believed in this sun god, which I talked about earlier in this video. That's what he used to play on the life. He just only wanted to be saved. And he brings up that this sun god, quote unquote, who obviously the ties to Joyba would be the first thing you would think of because he made people laugh and saved them from their situation. Now, does that mean he saved them, actually freed them as slaves because of the reference that he used to Jimbe being former slaves, which for a lot of reasons, Jimbe I took offense to. Like, hey man, you getting real racist this chapter, or speciesist, or whatever you want to call it. But I thought it was funny the way Oda play had Who's Who play it off like, oh haha, my bad. And then he just kept continuing talking. Like, I'm like, man, that's just like being online sometimes. And unfortunately, sometimes it's real life. Like, oh, that was messed like, well, my bad, and just that was really realistic to me anyway, for obvious reasons, if you haven't noticed by the sound of my voice by now. But anyway, I just thought this fight was cool because you had lore and information and power scaling all in one. Because that brick fist, when we see that in the anime, I want to see if they make a different type of noise or add a color to it, or maybe I'm overlooking something, or over analyzing that whole situation, because he's crushed his skull. Buddy got cracked, like straight cracked. I mean, how Jimbe hit Who's Who is the type of level of punch I expect from King Konga and Rio. This is what level I'm expecting to probably be obviously a bit more devastating because Luffy's DC is just off the chain to begin with. But the Sun God thing, I know people are gonna be they're in their bag right now. I know Joy Boy's in his bag right now. That man's in his bag. Everybody's in their bag. So we gonna see what it is tonight. I want to see what the community, what they tie together. The Sun God thing is obvious because they dropped the actual name, but that video that I saw, I just remember them talking about. They actually talk about fruit in that video. That's why I was paying attention to it that long, because they brought up he ate a fruit and a jade emerald and some other stuff. I didn't really look at it. It was just one of those things you put in your playlist, like, oh, I'm gonna watch that later, and you get so much stuff piled up, especially if you're into like trying to figure out the series and stuff like that. Y'all know what time it is. Y'all get stuck on the same wavelength. But anyway, I think there's a break next week. So I'll probably do something next week with this whole Jinbei thing and what his abilities are and tying that stuff together, because he did not appreciate the Fisherman Tiger references and the slavery thing. And, y'all know, man. Y'all knew as soon as you read the panel, like, oh, it's going to be some memes today, boy. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed everything about the chapter. That was pretty cool. And it's time to reread again because the Sun God thing obviously